So if this is just a discussion,
Well,
we'll
are
proceed.
we, this isn't the last opportunity to make changes, I assume, right?
No, but Mayor Kelly,
I
direction?
think that this is where you're giving direction to staff. So if a majority of you would like to give that direction to staff to come back with a change in the language, that would be an appropriate thing to indicate. If you think that, as what Terry just said, that the staff has made the point and that you think that the language that's already available is adequate, then you would vote against asking the staff to do that. So I think if that's the cleanest way to do it. So you just take a vote. It's not that we're voting on the whole plan. It's that we're giving the staff the focused and prioritized direction about what changes you as a group would like to see.
Do you want to make a motion? Or do you think,
I'm not seeing any particular support in the council, so if someone else thinks that it's good to add some more specificity beyond high quality and best, that'd be nice.
Councilmember Barker? I mean, yeah, you're next.
Yeah, but I'm going off on a different topic.
That's
so
okay. I think we
okay.
have settled that one.
So in reviewing the goals, and forgive me, this is my first look at this as a council member, so I appreciated all the goals, and I think they did align nicely, as it said, mirroring the legacies. But there was a legacy there that I felt like was missed. So what I'm doing is moving towards probably making a motion to give some direction to staff to add a goal. And the goal is develop policies on transportation and environmental justice. And the reason why I bring that up, and Lisa, I have a page of that specific goal and then some other policies that might go along with it. But the Federal Highway Administration, they, as I'm sure you know, have a whole set of environmental justice suggestions and requirements, especially at the local level and with things like WTA. And they specifically state things like avoid disproportionately high and adverse impacts on minorities and low-income populations, minimize and mitigate unavoidable impacts by identifying concerns early in the planning phase, and providing offsetting initiatives and enhancement measures to benefit affected communities and neighborhoods, enhance the public involvement process. And I'm just going to read these so you're aware of where I'm going. So if we do the direction, I would be handing her that piece of paper. But enhance the public involvement process, and this one's really important, strengthening community-based partnerships and provide minority and low-income populations with opportunities to learn about and improve the quality and usefulness of transportation in their lives, affect transportation decisions making, effective transportation decisions making depends upon understanding and properly addressing the unique needs of different social economic groups. Identify residential employment and transportation patterns of low-income and minority populations so that their needs can be identified and addressed, and the benefits and burdens of transportation investment are based equitably. Evaluate and, where necessary, improve public involvement process to eliminate participation barriers and engage minorities and low-income populations to transportation decision-making. Just a couple more. Address transportation-related populations in overburdened, poor urban environments, and work toward identifying elements of success, then develop appropriate evaluation and measurement of that success. And I'm not saying that this specific language, but I do think it's very important, and as we move forward and knowing that growth can be inequitable, we know that many times our minority populations of color are disproportionately subject to environmental noise issues, pollution issues, and as we try to densify corridors, I think we have to be extremely mindful from the very beginning to the very end. And I think if that were a goal, it's going to create a little bit extra work, but and we define that out. I think it also gives direction whenever we go to do things, which I have another motion on a different part, where it says go to neighborhoods and interested stakeholders, where there would be meat there to say, you know, you have to go out and specifically identify the populations that are going to be impacted, and how are you going to go about really engaging that population. So my motion then is to give direction to the administration to develop a sixth goal at T6, something along the lines of developing policies on transportation and environmental justice.
Councilmember Barker, before we go into that, I think I could get some clarification here, but I believe Smart Trips and WTA both have elements of this in their plan. Is that not accurate, or maybe Ted or Rick, either one of you could address this. I just want to know if we're already doing it, or if it does need to be.
Well, we're not.
I think that might be a question that we don't have the answer to it directly, so if this is something the council would like us to pursue, we will.
I can actually.
Oh, actually, Chris can answer this
Here.
question.
Okay.
So in our bicycle and pedestrian plans, we went through extensive efforts to look at those very things from an environmental justice standpoint, from low income to people with special needs. And the weighting factors used in assessing where we needed to have new facilities on the pedestrian and bicycle networks are very clearly addressed in that manner. So we took that into consideration. WTA has gone to great lengths in their strategic plan update to involve low-income populations and special populations. They've had one of their consultants who specializes in using other languages and reaching out in that manner. So they've gone a long way in that regard. I would point you also to some of the goals that are in here in terms of goal number 2, T2, provide safe, well-connected, and sustainable mobility options for all users. And then if you go on to page 7, where T2 is more specifically addressed with policies, there's quite a number of these that actually address, I think, what you're getting at in terms of an environmental justice standpoint. Policy T5 through T8 all address the need to reach out and engage different citizens from different populations, as well as special needs and facility types.
So my motion stands, and the reason is I think it's great, and I know that you do that, but when I was a layperson coming into this, I would go back to your policies, and although I'm hearing that you're doing that and I'm seeing it, our policies are not directing overall as we look at transportation. And if our federal highway administration is looking at that and has extremely specific policies and policy direction for local government, I just don't see any reason why we can't go right along with that. There's so many more things besides trying to engage low income or populations of color, minorities. There's issues when you do disproportionately, like it said in one of those policies, affect somebody, you find some other things that you bring along with it. So again, my motion stands. I appreciate that WTA does it. I appreciate that our staff has the forethought to do it, but I want it embedded, and I want no matter who's in administration or who's in what job, it's going to get looked at. So,
Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, and I will second that motion, and I do agree. I think it should be called out. It might, because we do have, right now, we have fairly enlightened staff on WTA and others, but by the time of the next update, who knows? And when people look at it, I think it is important in the comp plan that this is an important enough issue to be called out within the policy. So I can.
Mayor Kelly, and then also I'm curious if staff is clear what's being asked.
Well, and I was going to ask you to, if you're asking the staff to come back with a goal on that, on the environmental, transportation, environmental
Justice.
equity or justice, then if you have staff, are you expecting that it will enumerate all the things that you just said from the federal, or are you thinking that it's going to be something that we, as a city, have committed to?
So I trust that because I already know, and having many conversations with staff, that we already lean in that direction. I think adding the goal, and then you guys are best at looking at, you have it all set up by goals, look at how we set that up to really target. I have some suggestions here, and some articles from the Federal Highway Administration. So very broad, but to definitely add the goal and then write out what you normally would from that, referencing our legacies and others.
And then that would be something that you could direct, that would be a direction to staff if you have one.
As I understand it, what we would do is we would have an overarching goal that would sort of set the stage, and then we'd look at the other sub-goals or policies that are in the document you provided, make sure those are covered by existing, and if they're not, we'll fill in the blank.
And we could offer all kinds of things we already do, make it clear. So I'll give this to Lisa when I'm done.
Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, I was just wondering, since this one is kind of broad in some ways, if it would make sense if both parties were interested and willing for April maybe to sit down with staff to try to do that so that it encompasses what she is, talking about specifically before it comes back to us. If the council here decides this is what we want with at least 4 votes, of course.
Yeah. I feel pretty confident. I gave you a nice packet to look at. I'm not expecting this to all come back this way, but with the articles, and then my phone number.
Councilmember Barker, would
yeah.
you like to restate your motion, please?
My motion is to give staff direction to add goal T6, something along the lines of develop policies on transportation and environmental justice. And
Okay. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Councilmember Lillquist.
I have a question about goal T2, provide safe, well-connected, and sustainable mobility options for all users. Sounds great. Then if you go to page 7, it lists several policies that are supposed to carry out that goal. One of the words in there is sustainable. I'm not sure what is meant in this case by sustainable. Does it just mean low fossil fuel use? And if so, I don't see anything in particular in those policies which carries out has a sustainability element to it. So what did we mean by sustainable, and which of those policies carries out that element?
Well, there is specific reference to some sustainable measures when we're building infrastructure. There's also the idea of financial sustainability and being able to maintain things that we build. And so that's essentially where we're looking at this in terms of what sustainable means. There is specific policy in here talking about using pervious concrete whenever possible for sidewalks.
For bike lanes, yeah.
And for bike lanes. But from a financial sustainability standpoint, we want to make sure we can maintain over time what we build. We're, as you know, been struggling with maintaining our asphalt resurfacing as it is.
Well, that all makes sense, but I'm just saying underneath goal T2, none of those statements are found. So shouldn't we nest them under T2 that basically says in our transportation capacity planning, we look at financial sustainability as well as lowering the impact on our, say, stormwater infrastructure? If that's what we mean by sustainability in a goal, where's the policy that goes with it? It'd be nice if that connection was actually written down underneath that goal.
Is there a way that we have a definition of what sustainability means to the city just put into the plan, and then it can segue to that? Like,
Well, Minister Como indicated that it's being used in several different ways, financial sustainability as well as resource sustainability.
which is all part of one definition? Yes? No? Anyone?
I think coming up with a definition that covers all of that would be quite difficult. I think sustainability means a lot of different things to a lot of different audiences.
It does, which I believe Councilmember Lillquist is addressing.
So what do we mean in this case, and how do we show that in an actual policy? If we're really meaning financial sustainability, let's have a policy which goes with it, that we plan with life cycle costs in mind. If we mean also environmental sustainability, then we need a policy which basically says we plan our transportation infrastructure with the idea in mind of lessening the impacts upon the environment. And neither of those two things is stated here in writing in this section. I'm not saying it doesn't exist somewhere inside the city. I'm saying there's no policy which says that. So I'd like to add that.
The way that this reads, if you really try to parse the words here, it says provide safe, well-connected, and sustainable mobility options. To me, that kind of infers that it's something that we're going to build and take care of over time.
Well, if it's that, then it'd be nice to see a policy which carries that word forward more specifically and says what we mean by sustainable for our mobility options. It's not there. I think this could be easily created and pulled out of implications elsewhere in the document. It's just not stated. I just think it was a little oversight. So I would like to see that added and made clear.
Staff, do you have any comments on that? Mayor Kelly.
I think it's the same thing. I hate to see the staff sitting here putting their heads together trying to come up with with something, even though that's a good thing. So if you guys want us to come up with a definition of sustainability that applies to this section, that's a direction to give staff, and then we'll come back with
It's not so much a
something.
definition as kind of the example of what the policy is. How do we carry it out? In this context, sustainable means this. This is what we mean. It's not-
Okay, I was talking more about language. If you'd like some language that you
Yeah.
could consider, then that would be some direction you could give us. Or if we find that it's already covered someplace, we'll let you know that too.
Rick?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest this is a phrase. This is going to come up in a number of our chapters. We do discuss it in the intro. What we'd like to do is come back and just take a look at it. We'll do a search. Let's take a look at it. Let's see how we use it. And if we need to do refinements and definitions so it's consistent throughout the plan, or if we find different kinds of sustainability that we're meaning different things, we should address it. But we do need to do that research. We'll take a look at it.
Councilmember Lillquist, is that, give staff an opportunity? Councilmember
We
Murphy?
deal in motions, and that's how we do outreach. So I would like to make a motion that we would have staff assess how we use sustainability throughout our comprehensive plan.
Second.
That's a good motion,
It's a
Roxanne.
good motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
I was opposed.
And this is a great way for us to.
I was opposed.
What? You were opposed?
Have a chance to get in there. That's all.
Did- You're opposed, okay. Councilmember Lillquist.
I'm wondering if something is missing in the draft, or I didn't quite understand on page 11. Policy T6 kind of ends with a as follows. Was something supposed to be there? So it says strive to decrease single occupant vehicle work trips while increasing work trips made by walking, bicycling, public transport, ride sharing as follows. Was there supposed to be something there? Because if so, it doesn't even need to be a policy. 'cause
You
it's-
said policy T6?
Policy T16, sorry.
16.
16.
16.
We were saving that for later,
Okay.
but
Yeah,
we should
good
put it
catch.
in
Looks
now.
like something got left out.
So, yeah, we find out what's missing?
Yep.
We will, absolutely. Sorry about that.
Good catch.
Good catch. Councilmember Kaminsky.
I just want to make an observation, and let me start out by saying, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but we've been here for an hour and 5 minutes, and we're still on transportation. Now, when I first came in here today, I thought it would be a lot smoother. Why? Because as far as I'm concerned, this is just me. My concerns are in housing and land use. I have questions there. The rest of it, I think, has been written very well. And I want to go back to what something was said in the earlier slides. This chapter was 125 pages long in 2006. It's now down to 40. If we continue on this pace, it's going to be up there again. And this reminds me of the old days of the budget, when the budget was this big. And we're not to be going line by line. You know, everybody thinks this is not, or they think it is a total comprehensive rewrite, and I feel that's where we're headed. You know, I watched a lot of the Planning Commission meetings on television. There isn't one member of the audience here today. We're not getting emails on the transportation or capital facilities, utilities thing. So we can micromanage and go and put all the wordsmithing we want, but some of it's okay. But if we continue down this path, I don't see how we get done by August 8th. It's just not going to happen. If we have an hour and a half or 2 hours on each item, it's going to be a long haul. So I know everybody has concerns, and they have their right. They can. Some for April, she's never looked at one of these before. I don't know if Pinky or Roxanne have either. This is the first one. So, I mean, if you've had, I'm just saying, I'm getting concerned to how we're going to get bogged down.
Councilmember Borneman, and then I'm going to suggest that we move on to stage 2 of this presentation.
I just wanted to respond, Gene, on parts of us. I think especially when Planning Commission have recommended changes different from what the staff recommends, I think it's important for us to look at very closely and to discuss
No, I agree with that.
those kind of changes. So I think even though I think overall everything's pretty well done, but I think looking at those is really important about why did they do this, and do we agree with that body, or do we agree with how staff has written?
I understand
Yeah.
that part.
Council, would we be comfortable on moving on to the second part of our session today? Is everyone good with that? Okay.
I actually have a couple things I need to ask the council for.
Okay.
So I passed out this one-page item. DOT has made a request that on page 27, in the discussion of state highways, they simply wanted a more concrete link in terms of the classifications and designations that they use to the way that we report this on an annual basis in the transportation report on annual mobility. And the language that's proposed here it's exactly what they've requested, and I've had discussions with them, and they're fine with this. So it's just adding this very short paragraph into this section. Doesn't change goals or policies. They just wanted this reflected that they know that their issues will be resolved when we look at the system each and every year.
Do you need a motion to have this approved? before
This is
we-
an amendment, so I think you would want to make a motion.
So moved.
Second. Okay, so we have a motion in front of us. Any discussion on this topic? No? Okay, all those in favor to adding the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank
Motion
you.
carries 7-0.
I have one last item, and that is that
Yeah, I got it.
we're simply seeking direction from council. And actually, this kind of alludes to something that Jean was talking about just a minute ago. We have been trying to make sure that we are eligible for a new funding program from Transportation Improvement Board in Washington. It's called Complete Streets. And when they passed this legislation several years ago, there was no funding that came with it. And now, in the last round of legislation, they have funded it. But in order to be eligible for this money, we need to have something in the form of an ordinance. We had been advised by TIB to make sure that when we adopt our comprehensive plan, that the appropriate language was included, our complete networks approach, which is infused throughout this document, included in the adopting ordinance of the comprehensive plan. But there's some deadlines involved, and it's not a traditional funding program. We don't apply for this money. We get nominated for this money by other agencies and advocacy organizations. And to make sure that we're eligible and that we get nominated, we need to make sure that we can point to something concrete that we can check the box. We have an ordinance. So related to the timing of when this gets adopted and the deadlines for TIB, the nominations are going to be asked for in August, and the deadline is October 21st. We're feeling like we're kind of bumping up against some timelines, and that rather than waiting to have the comp plan adopted, it's hard to tell what might happen through that process. We should do a standalone ordinance to make sure that we comply with the funding eligibility and that we'll move forward with that. And if I could just get direction from council on that, we will take care of it.
Councilmember Murphy.
Make a motion that we would ask staff to draft as soon as possible a complete streets ordinance.
Second.
I'm sorry, complete networks is what we're going for.
Complete networks.
Okay. Got that, Marie?
Second.
Okay. Okay, so motion in front of us for staff to draft an ordinance for the complete, remember the names of all that? Complete street networks. Complete street networks. I'll be writing that down now. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. And I believe Councilmember Barker has a question, and after that, I'm going to ask that if you have any other additional questions on this, that you submit them to staff and that we move on to the second portion of our presentation today.
Okay, so in goal 5, which I think is, sorry, I got nervous because we're stopping talking now. Can you read it specifically? It says, maintain and improve street trails and other infrastructure. So my question with this, and I can see if I need to do a policy, is, that goal was very clear to me, but recently we've had the over Broadway, going over the Broadway train connection, and also Fever Creek Bridge, which are important parts of, I'd say at least the Fever Creek one is an important part of the trail connection. And the policy would say that we're supposed to be maintaining and improving. So I guess either you could let me know where that is in here and how it got missed, or the motion, I might need to make a motion to ask staff to put specific policy, or to at least look and investigate policy that directly relates to maintenance, something like developing every 4 years a detailed conditions of bridge and other linkages on trails, so we know when they're failing and we actually can maintain them and plan for monies. if I could get feedback first, and then I can make a motion if I need to.
Sure. Yeah, and it definitely does reference all of the transportation network here, including the trails. We are required by state law to inspect our bridges most of them every 2 years. We have certain inspections for our larger bridges where we actually go underneath the bridge less frequently, but that does not include the Parks bridges. So we have been working with Parks, are going to join into our inspection program, but I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of Leslie on how they maintain their bridges, so I would defer to Parks Department on that.
So any trails that have Parks bridges, this doesn't apply to?
Yeah, it is confusing. I would agree with that, since it does reference trails, because trails are, some trails, not all trails, but we have identified trails that are a recognized component of our transportation system, even to the degree that we consider them for concurrency. But I wouldn't think that maintenance of the Parks Trail bridges would be covered under the transportation element. I would believe that would be more appropriate for the pro plan. And I can follow up with Leslie, and we can follow up with council on that with some language or some additional discussion.
I appreciate that, because I think that nobody would know that just by looking at this.
Yeah,
And
it's
if those are
confusing.
parts of our trail linkages that are for pedestrian and cyclists, that, I mean, to say it's parks or,
I agree.
Thank you.
We'll clarify.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we will move on to the second part of our presentation. And Greg, is that, Rick, is there any intro, or we're going to go right into, all right,
think
Greg,
Greg
it's
will
all
just-
you.
Seamlessly proceed.
Seamlessly.
Good afternoon, council. It's not quite so seamless. I am here on behalf of Moshe Quinn, who is the principal author of this chapter. He went home sick today, so I'll do the best I can. I have lots of support here in the audience from staff members to help me get through it. In terms of capital facilities, the state requirements, we have to have an inventory of our existing facilities, forecast of future needs, a 6-year plan that shows what those needs are and how they would be financed. We have to look at the location and the capacity of our existing facilities, and if we find that we can't provide the facilities and services that are needed, we have to reassess the land use chapter and the densities that are allowed to make sure that we can provide the facilities. In terms of GMA, the goal for capital facilities is written quite unartfully, I would say, ensure that those public facilities and services necessary to support development shall be adequate to serve the development at the time the development is available for occupancy and use without decreasing current levels of service. Yuck. I'm glad I didn't write that. When we're talking about facilities and services, we're talking about streets and sidewalks, which we just talked about, lighting systems, signals, water and sewer facilities, stormwater systems, government facilities and schools, public services, fire protection and emergency services, law enforcement, education, recreation, environmental protection, and other governmental services. And we also have to address private utilities in this chapter as well. Level of service, or LOS, is a measure of the minimum amount of public facilities and services that must be provided to meet the community's basic needs and expectations. The state law GMA requires that we have LOS standards only for transportation facilities, but we can adopt level of service standards for other facilities in our comprehensive plan if we so choose. And we have done that, actually. We have level of service standards for water and sewer facilities, for stormwater facilities, for fire and EMS, for parks, and for police response times. In terms of the police's adopted LOS, and this is one of the things that's proposed to be changed, the old plan, or the current plan actually, the level of service is 1 officer per 1,000 residents, or 1 officer per 750 calls for service. The new level of service standard is listed on the screen, compares calls and service with number of officers necessary to handle calls, and it factors in other things like workload, discretionary time, administrative leave, and so forth. I don't see Chief Cook here, so I'm hoping that you don't have questions about that, or if you do, we'll find the answers for you. We're also proposing a new library level of service, and this is listed on the screen. 0.6 square feet per capita is the low or minimal standard. The medium or operational standard would be 0.8 square feet per capita, and the high is listed there as well. The minimal is what's needed to adequately provide the most basic of library services. Operational or the medium range allows the library to adequately provide for all services, and the optimal allows the library to enhance services. And currently, I have notes on this, currently our library is at the minimal stage. Yes, we have, the current library system has 55,400 square feet of building area, and that puts it in the minimal stage or minimal section. If we decided to adopt the 0.8 square feet or the medium range, we would need 11,000 additional square feet, and if we went for the high range, we would need 28,000 square feet of additional library space. The Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, is an important part of this chapter, and it's the component of the biennial budget that you approve every 2 years that automatically transfers to the comp plan, so that when you adopt the budget every year or every 2 years, that list of projects, that 6-year list of projects, automatically becomes the CIP and the comp plan. So you'll notice that in the current version of the draft plan, there are both funded and unfunded projects. There's a long list of projects. The total is $342 million. The funded part of it is $183 million. So when you go through the budget process this fall, whatever winds up being in that 6-year plan has to be only funded projects. So we can have a list of unfunded projects, but in terms of what winds up in the comp plan, they have to only be the funded projects. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I could follow up on that. As council is aware, the city is currently facilitating an ongoing review process to look at that level of service and the goal to achieve a sustainable level of service. As council will recall, the goal of this is to match our anticipated revenues with our anticipated expenses so that we're not dependent on reserves to fill the gap. Because as reserves decline over time, 2 to 4 years down the road, we reach a point where we're no longer able to meet our level of service. In doing that, we have a number of strategies that we're pursuing that include reduction in program scope, or outsourcing, or consolidation or reprioritization, or additional revenues. We're looking at all of those, and council was briefed at their last meeting on sort of the steps where we are in that process. Projects in the CIP are directly dependent on the city's ability to identify and implement those strategies in the next 2 to 4 years. Because absent successful implementation, you'd have to reduce your level of service broadly or in selected areas. And we also want to be mindful in that some proposed increases in terms of capital facilities are predicated on things that might change. For example, if we are at staff level peaks, we don't have to anticipate adding more space for office space in the future. You kind of know we're not going there, so we wouldn't have to do it. Towards that end, we have suggested and that funded projects are the ones we are statutorily obligated by the state law to show a funding source for, and we've done so. However, we have taken all of the unfunded projects, many of which have merit, put them in a separate table. Council could, and the city can, adopt the CIP only with those funded projects, with a note that at the completion of the LOS cycle in this review, we would come back in the next 2 years to amend it for those other projects that are worthy with a defined funding source within the 6-year horizon. So that would be the recommendation on how one would address that. Short of that, the confidence interval of finding funding for many of the suggested projects is somewhat uncertain. And it would seem that we might be proposing things that we might not be able to fund, and we really want to strive for a CIP that really does show our intent of what we can do, not what we hope to do.
Thank you, Rick. And lastly, the Planning Commission is recommending 5 changes to the chapter. I think I would characterize these as fairly minor. CF 13 added quality of life amenities to the existing policy. CF 43, which is on page 15, add police and equipment to the existing policy. CF 60, which is on page 20, is the policy for the library. So you might want to take a look at that one as well. The policy that staff wrote, I think, was a little more general. The Planning Commission actually made it a little more directive. Policy CF 79, again, fairly minor wording change, and they did add a new statement in the plan that's on page 37 addressing the Mount Baker Theater and just the value that that facility provides in the community. And with that, we can have a discussion.
I have a couple questions on the adopted police level of service. I'm not sure exactly what we're saying. Are we saying that we are currently meeting what's stated in the 2006 and that there is no changes to the current requirements for police level of service, or is there a new equation for this?
Without Chief here, what I can tell you is they believe that they're short of staff, that they're 5 detectives short of meeting the existing level of service standard, not the new one, but the existing one. And they also are in the process of conducting a survey of similar agencies across the state to compare staffing levels, and they will be bringing that information to you shortly. Other than that, Pinky, I'm going to have to get back to you with the
Okay,
answer
so
to
maybe
that
we
question.
could ask for clarification on what the new requirement is, whether we're meeting that requirement, and if not, what the new suggested requirement is.
If I remember right, reading this we're at the low to minimal is what we're hitting, and then that's where they have the future forecast of what they're looking at to need. So, just to clarify.
I'm sorry?
It says we're low, but doesn't tell us anything. Not library, police.
Library. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. No, that's, that one I got, yeah. Yeah, I know, I read it. Yeah.
Glad I wasn't the only one that was confused by
We'll give
that.
her a pass. Okay, thank you. So as long as we can know what the numbers are that we're looking for, and what we're trying to achieve, so we can give direction on low, medium, high, like we were doing for the library. Councilmember Hamel.
Thank you. I guess I have a question sort of along those lines. It's going to sound like a narrow question, but it has to do with a broader context, and that is public cost of level of service. And this is page 14 and 15 of the draft plan in relation to the ADICO forecast of future needs for law enforcement officers. Calls for service are anticipated at the same average of 1.8%. The police department could experience a service increase of 9%, receiving over 57 calls for service by 2019. My question is, how do innovations like predictive policing, which came through this last year, and the neighborhood police officer program, and the investments that we are putting into the incarceration prevention and reduction task force, which are significant in terms of time and ideas, do those factor into future needs in this forecast, or are they not part of that forecast?
I think what we need to do is come back and say, here's how this was arrived at, and talk about what existing programs and economies are being sought, and whether that's reflected, or whether if they're successful, they'll lessen the need. And that's kind of why we're looking at the LOS issue to sort of resolve that. Is it changing, and does it change then the capital facilities? If you have to add a number of detectives, you've got to house them somewhere. Do you have adequate room to do that? In the old days, we just add more square footage, and that cost would be somehow found. At this point, we're trying to say, do we need that square footage, or is it being addressed through these economies? But I think it would to be dependent on the chief to talk about the rationale, how that factors in, how it is achieving level of service, and perhaps even ask the question, absent those, what would the level of service look like? I mean, what would we need?
And I was going to suggest that too, that the chief be here, because there is sometimes a difference between how things are counted. We kept using the word detective, and there's some who would use the word officer. So a detective doesn't necessarily, meet the level of service for the person that's out on the street necessarily. So I think that those questions would be better directed to the chief. As you know, because each of the areas came up with their own level of service. And I think it's important for the council to be able to ask those questions about how they were arrived at and that type of thing.
Sure, and I recognize that. I guess my question goes to me. The mayor and I serve on this task force, and we spend a fair amount of time with other stakeholders in our community, and I want to make sure that those efforts bear fruit, and is the fruit in the amount of future forecast, basically.
And some of the things that we're talking about now are in the context of not meeting our predictive and reactive policing ratio. So it wouldn't necessarily reduce the need, but it might help us reach the 50-50 predictive reactive policing model sooner.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Kelly, that was a great introduction. There's a phrase missing in here and a certain thing missing that's just right here, but it's not here. What's missing is the phrase community policing, which is what we do, but it's not stated. And the way that we achieve community policing is exactly what Kelly was indicating. Our police department, Chief Cook, has come up with a model based on best practices that patrol officers should be spending an equal amount of time being proactive and reactive. And if they're spending too much time being reactive, you haven't adequately staffed. That's the new level of service. But again, that's missing in any policy statement or any goal. So I would create, out of language that's here, out of policies that already exist, a policy in here. I'm going to make it a motion that we draft a new policy in this section that says basically support community policing model by providing adequate patrol staffing to spend equal time on proactive and reactive activities.
Page 14.
And Michael, for the exact language, I'd like to make sure that we're not adopting something until we've talked to the chief, to make sure we don't unintentionally put something in that doesn't make that easy for him to do or whatever. So you'd like it mentioned? I mean, I think your goal, what's your goal if you were giving us the exact language?
Again, I'm using language that already exists.
Right.
My goal is to indicate that we're a community policing city.
Okay.
And my goal is to actually make a policy which refers to our new level of service, which is an equal balance between proactive and reactive time on patrol. I think that needs to be stated in writing, or it's, then it's departmental policy rather than a city policy.
And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just talking about the exact language that we're proposing. Could we come back with you with the language?
If you got a better sentence, I'd be happy.
Okay, thank you.
And also, I might ask that since Chief Cook is not here to actually have this discussion, I'm wondering if that could be something that we could bring up. Or obviously, we're asking for this information now, but to revisit this when we have Chief Cook here, who could maybe help us define before we set off on something that we don't really know what his objective.
I think staff can develop that language, and when it comes back to us, we'll also have Chief Cook's opinion and his input.
Okay. Councilmember Borneman.
Yes, on your motion, if you change that motion to direct staff to develop language to include those things, I'll second it.
Okay. Yeah.
So, any discussion, council members?
I'll support the motion, but I do want to make sure that the chief has thorough input on this.
Same here. I'm supportive of that as long as it is aligned with Chief Cook and he's had a chance to take a look at it. So the motion in front of us is to add language around community police, or asking staff
To develop
to
language.
develop language around community policing.
It also encapsulates in some way the level of service idea of splitting proactive and reactive time.
Okay, so Marie, do you have something definitive for a motion? Okay, all right, so all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Okay.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. Mine will be quick.
Councilor
The
Wilkinson.
Page 37, the statement on Mount Baker Theater, that was very well written. I'm glad it's in there. I don't think we've ever put that in there before, have we? Yeah. Okay.
I have one, and then I'm going to pounce you. So, quick question around the proposed new library level of service. Are you asking for direction from the staff to go towards low, medium, and high? I want to clarify what you're looking for from us or what is being proposed, because I'm uncertain exactly what you would like from us.
If I might give a suggestion, we're looking at fire, police, parks, transportation, and library. Those are the levels of service we've established. Transportation largely has been addressed. I think at this point it's not an issue to revisit it. It's a functional issue that balances itself out by our proposed plan. Parks will be assessed as through the Parks Committee. That's starting ongoing work to sort of come back with a recommendation to this body. I do think both fire and police need to come and talk about the issues they've seen, because remember, they did assess level of service and what the implications would be, and certainly library similarly. They've proposed a standard. Clearly, we should set time to look at all of these together and say what the cumulative effect would be.
Okay, so you're not looking for direction from us in regards to low, medium, and high, not until we...
I should note that Pam is here and can respond to your question now, but I do think we need to sort of set up a rigorous review before you take action on anyone.
Okay, yeah, that, I guess that's what I'm like, do you want this from us, or is there a next step on that, or?
Respectfully, the best suggestion is I'd suggest my colleague Pam speak to why they selected that and give you that background information. You'll have the chief, fire, parks ultimately come too, and then you look at them all together, because it's the cumulative effect that's the issue. And if we don't look at them all together, we may be sort of, the field won't be level. Askew, yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Councilmember Lillquist, and actually Councilmember Barker was, and then Lillquist.
On the very first goal, well, I wish Moshe was here, because I'd like to thank him for the language that was added in policy CF1. Just says there, provide, maintain, and upgrade public facilities to meet the primary service needs of the city in a manner which respects social diversity, protects public investment, and so on. And this was a conversation that I had with Moshe when I was just a constituent, and it was, of course, far previous to Orlando, but the idea that we're going through a large cultural shift in America, not only moving into a minority majority, but also being more acceptive and inclusive. And I think that this lays the foundation for us in our facilities to start looking at opportunities to be more inclusive, whether that mean restrooms or facilities or whatever. So that was a hard one to figure out language, and I think he just said it perfectly. And I ran it by Northwest Youth Services and a few others to see if it was appropriate, and they had agreed. The one suggestion I would have is on goal CF1, deliver safe, and then add inclusive, cost-effective, and accountable public facilities and services. And the reason being not only to support what he's added in CF1, but that we're looking at those ideas of being more inclusive whenever we're building facilities or improving facilities. So my motion would be to add the word inclusive, deliver safe, inclusive, cost-effective, and accountable public facilities and services.
Comments?
Yeah, just to define what you mean by inclusive.
I could I could bring a definition, but it's the opposite of exclusive.
But I mean,
Just kidding, Dan.
I
I'm
mean, in
just-
terms of, like inclusive could be, for people with disabilities, which I would absolutely support.
It encompasses all of that. I mean, it's stating that not only are we going to be inclusive to people that aren't cisgender, not only are we going to be inclusive to all mobilities levels. I think it's the idea of thinking about everybody beyond us. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because to me it's just such a basic term, but maybe to others it wouldn't be. Rick? Oh, sorry.
If I might, and being a little anticipatory, seeing that this is an important issue before council to look at the various component parts, might staff come back with an overarching policy we can put in our introduction that would more generally describe what is inclusive and the goals and aspirations of the city towards that? And I'm suggesting we might be able to bring that to you for consideration. And then we could say, is it being amplified in the various chapters correctly, as part of that? Because I think at this point, we should have a broader statement that frames that discussion. We'd be happy to prepare it for your review.
Okay, thank you.
So would we still need to make a motion, or we have discussed this and asked staff to provide?
Respectfully, I'd suggest if you could if you can complete that action before you and then direct us to come back with an introduction, or if that's the appropriate place,
Yeah.
to put a broader policy that applies to all of the chapters.
Councilmember Barker, would you care to restate
So
your
my motion is to direct staff to add language into the introduction regarding equity, inclusion, and then ensure that it more broadly impacts all of the goals in its.
Second it.
Yeah.
Discussion? Okay, so we have a motion in front of us to add language to our introduction that includes equity and inclusion. I think there was a little bit more to that. Did you get all of the terminology in that one? Okay. Does everyone understand what we're voting on? All right. All those in favor? Oh, wait, sorry. Mayor Kelly. Okay. Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Mayor Kelly.
Yeah, I was just mentioning to Rick, and he said yes, that he thought it would work out. We had the discussion earlier about sustainability, and I think it would be beneficial if we provided the sustainability filter the same way we're talking about the equity and inclusion, because it should hit all the policies that we make, not just specific ones. And so if the council would just consider that as a friendly motion when we come back with the language.
Councilmember Lillquist, then Barker.
Well, this kind of piggybacks very nicely on that, because sustainability came up before, and there was a suggestion that we needed to deal with it similarly. Somewhere early on, describe what we mean by sustainability. What I want to bring up right now is an example in this chapter where I think sustainability is not adequately dealt with. Of the 8 goals, one of them does mention sustainability, but only with regard to the water supply. And I think that what that really means in that case is that we'll keep having enough water forever and ever. And that's one meaning sustainable, but not the full meaning sustainable. I was at the Association of Washington Cities conference last week, and one of the best parts of it had to do with a talk on sustainable infrastructure. And the messages was that our infrastructure needs to work with nature more than in the past, and that our infrastructure needs to do double duty. And a perfect example of that is urban forestry and street trees. If you have enough street tree coverage, you don't need stormwater facilities. So it seems like we're missing something in here about sustainable infrastructure at a goal level, and then there's a policy which kind of touches on a policy, CF34 on page 9, which says something about conventional storm drainage design and, where possible, rely upon alternative approaches. I think we need stronger language. I think we'd say if we are working towards sustainable infrastructure, then it's not a where possible. It is a thing we definitely need to do. It is cheaper and more sustainable to avoid having to create those conventional stormwater systems by utilizing natural systems in their place. So if there is additional language at the beginning on sustainability, I think one of the places to come back to is here in the chapter CF34, and punch up that sustainability note at that point.
And I like the idea that you're supporting putting it at the beginning. I also think that we need to look at the overall health of our watershed, whatever it is, because that might mean that you're not doing the same thing in every single place, but you're looking at the overall function. I got stuck on a word there.
Right, and this-
So I think the language might help, and then you guys can have the discussion about how many times you want to add it into
Right.
the
This
different goals.
CF34 wasn't about Lake Whatcom. It was about stormwater and low-impact development citywide. So I think it's a good place to, as I say, punch up what we mean by sustainability at that point.
Councilmember Barker.
Oh, I was just, I'm supportive of the sustainable, kind of having that as an overarching and then looking back through the goals and seeing where you could backfill it, so just wanted to.
Anyone else? I have something else. So under facilities and services, I just want to ask that in our housing brief, that it is outlined all the places where we actually have water and sewer and stormwater facilities in locations that where our, I'm going to make sure I'm stating this correctly, in the available land lots in order to build for development, where we actually have facilities that could be easily connected. Does my question make sense? I'm not sure if I'm asking that correctly.
Well, to clarify for me, places where we already have pumps and pipes and whatever, the infrastructure is already there, and you're talking about in our city limits or in our UGA or?
In our city limits, but also in our UGA, because we have facilities in places where it would be easier to build, but those aren't necessarily obvious where it would be the easiest places to build, whether it's city or UGA, about what we actually already have out there that could be built upon because the infrastructure is already there.
Okay, I understand. I think we can do
Rick,
that.
does that make sense to you?
Yes, what I'm hearing you ask for is what lots without minor connecting to the lines in the street are ready to be developed.
Very well articulated,
And
thank
we
you.
certainly can tell you the lots that are served. We probably could even tell you the ones that are served by one utility and have another utility in close proximity, which would be a logical extension, not a major unit expansion, because those would have to count. The days of having all the lots with all the services right in front are pretty remote. So usually you're extending one or the other, and it might just be a short extension from the street. We'll find out.
And, part of, obviously there's the future, but also like the homes that we have right now that are right next to major stormwater or whatever that homes can't connect to. And so kind of like putting that into the equation because it comes in front of us over and over and over again. So I just kind of wanted to keeping all of those in mind in regards to our facilities plan. Anyone else have any additional? Councilmember Barker.
I'm looking at the capital facilities goals 2 and 3 are kind of put together on page 8 in light of our point in time count that just recently came out. I'm motioning that staff bring back potential or possible language or in policy that develops a policy on enforcement and removal of illegal camps for critical and riparian areas. And although I understand that we're starting to make a determination on when we are and we're not going to be, and where's the priority for illegal camps, homelessness, unfortunately, is not going away. And we have a huge amount of infrastructure along Swallowcombe Creek and other riparian areas that I hope that we would do the best we can to sign and enforce and really just make it very clear that these areas, it's no bueno. So making it simpler, my motion is for staff to bring back possible policy language that addresses the need to develop a specific policy of enforcement and removal of illegal camping in critical and riparian areas.
Marie, did you get that motion? Okay. April, I didn't hear that last part, critical to,
Oh, critical and riparian areas, so specifically along riparian, like,
Streamside, or
Yeah.
along
I'm
waterways.
sorry, thank you.
yeah, so areas that they're very delicate, and we put a lot of infrastructure and, well, not infrastructure, we put a lot of money into improving those volunteer time and staff time, and they can be destroyed in just one night of somebody sleeping over in those areas.
Councilmember Murphy.
Could we bring this up as a separate topic at another time? Because this is a pretty big motion to me.
If there's no second to my motion, it dies, so.
Second.
Okay, discussion. Councilmember Hamel, and then Lillquist, and then Borneman.
I'm trying to find where you're at in the
Yeah, I don't know
document.
where you're at either.
Okay, it's for stormwater, it's under goals, so it's kind of, this is set out by goals.
What
2 and
page is
3.
it on?
It's on page 8 of 64, and it's really under that idea where Mayor Carey was discussing, we have this, the broader spectrum. And the reason why I don't necessarily feel like it should have to come back at a different time is we have all kinds of policies in here that say we should begin to look at, we should start talking about. And this is a major issue, and we get people from both sides of this issue coming to council, people who are extremely sympathetic and understanding of the situation of homelessness, people who are absolutely not, but they are in agreement of we need to protect these critical and riparian areas. And therefore, if the language is here, and then as we move on, if there's a grant ability or, it can filter up, but at least it's something that we're moving toward. It's not going to be a simple discussion, but I think it's sitting here and we're aware of it. I've gotten several emails about it, so.
Councilmember Hamel, then Lillquist.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to understand your intended outcome with that type of policy language.
I think the hope is that we'll start having more discussions because it's in here, and then we can discuss the signage, the enforcement, the removal, so we can almost develop a culture of these areas are just, they're not available for this. And I think over time in cities, that I've visited, they make areas very clear, like this is not happening. And there's a huge network within parts of the homelessness community that this is a place you'll want to go. And if we can develop, not trying to overburden or be hurtful to anybody, but these specific areas are very delicate, and they're very instrumental in the health of our community and the health of our children. So my hope would be that we could kind of outline and look at something where it's not all the parks and the trails, but this specific that is related to stormwater, creek health, lake health, bay health, all of those things while we're trying to deal with the homelessness issue.
Councilmember Lillquist.
I believe I'm supportive. If I'm understanding you correctly, you don't want to begin a discussion of homeless camps in general. You want to focus on the fact that they have a high impact on keeping our water clean if those camps are located adjacent to our waterways in some uncontrolled fashion. So the policy that you're looking for is something specifically has to do with protecting water quality and not a general policy on illegal camps. Is that correct?
My motion was to add or bring possible policy language to develop, to start the conversation on enforcement and removal of illegal camps for critical and riparian areas. I'm going to stick with my motion so we don't get confused.
Councilmember Murphy, then Hamel.
I guess my just general question is this best suited in the capital facilities section? I think that's what I'm struggling with. And would it be stronger if it stood out on its own, as its own initiative? Because it could have just as much weight and could get just as much attention, because I'm not disagreeing with anything that you're saying. But that's, I think, what I'm struggling with is how this exactly would be in the comprehensive plan.
May I ask that maybe staff address that question?
And I certainly am talking about it under stormwater, but my motion wasn't specific to in stormwater comprehensive, but that you could maybe bring back some language where we could put in there that says we're aware of the issue and that we're going to work toward identifying some strategies.
Well, it is an issue that's come up between some different departments. And I think that because you asked the staff for some language doesn't mean everyone's adopting it or putting it here or whatever. So I think the act of asking for language to come forward about a discussion and what should be in it, that would be perfectly appropriate.
Okay, me, then Councilmember Borneman, and then Lillquist. So I'm going to go with wherever we think this policy is appropriate, but I do agree with the proposal. I think many of us have walked with the enforcement officers along our streams and creeks, and it's very sad, the destruction, and especially replanting trees that were replanted just weeks before, and it's not good for our budget, and it's not good for our environment. So I'm not sure what the appropriate place for this to be, but I do support us looking at this as a priority item in our enforcement. Councilmember Borneman, and then Lillquist.
I'm going to support it as well. There's some clear reasons why we have very strict building and code enforcement and buffers around the streams, because it's so easy to contaminate. And with camps and things, it's not just the knocking down of trees or whatever, but it is with, the camp fuels, the other kind of stuff, the other kind of garbage that easily go into the streams and damage, the water quality as well as a lot of things with it. So, I'll support it because I think we can.
Councilmember Lillquist, then Hamel.
I'm with you, Pinky. I don't know if this is the best place for that kind of policy, but I think it's important we do indicate that protecting our streams from that particular kind of impact is something that the city has as a policy.
Councilmember Hamel.
I don't disagree. I want us to understand, what some outcomes of this could be. So, if that, I don't want to go too far down this road because this is really, it's kind of, we've already done this a little bit, but this is criminal trespass in the second degree, and this theoretically could put a person in jail, and this would be at cross purposes with the work that we're doing with the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. With that being said, we can't have people camping on sensitive, critical areas. So I'll support it. I just want us to have kind of heads up on what it might entail.
So we will bring your motion in front of us here, April, but I just want to get the feedback from staff here about whether this should be included in the facilities portion, if this is appropriate, or if we asking for it to be part of our plan and it is in a different. Can you identify that?
Well, I'll add that mine was not specific to having to have it here. It was just a motion to have the language so that we can know that that's a priority and we'll be moving towards. So bring language, if possible, developing a policy on enforcement and removal of illegal camps for critical and riparian areas. And I trust that staff will be able to not only address, hopefully, those issues, and maybe that will be a good thing to come up in the incarceration task force, but all this is stating, just like if we say we're going to add, I don't know, I won't bring up any controversial things that are in the, the
So maybe
comprehensive plan, but
we could have
it's just
staff
saying we're
answer this.
going to start having this, and it
Let's-
doesn't have to be here. It just came up because I was in the stormwater
Yeah,
chapter.
let's have staff address this.
So
please.
we'll review the existing regulatory context and see if it's addressed elsewhere, if we find it. If it's not, we'll propose language and suggest where it might best fit to ensure that the policy intent is carried out.
Gracias.
Okay, so we did have a second, yes? Okay, so we have a motion in front of us to include language around stream enforcement and homeless camps. I don't remember the exact wording.
Can she restate it?
Do you want to restate your, because we have been through this a few times, so maybe you could restate your motion.
Direction for staff to see if there already is language that's already addressing this, but develop possible policy language in the comprehensive plan where appropriate that addresses enforcement and removal of illegal camping for critical and riparian areas.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Okay, Councilmember Lillquist.
I'd like to turn to policy CF6. It talks about when we're building new or renovating municipal buildings, and it says that we'll shoot for a minimum LEED Silver certification. I'm wondering why we're setting a minimum rather than doing what we do in other parts of the comp plan, which is set an aspirational goal, that we shall try to achieve gold rather than saying we'll do at least silver. And silver is actually very easy to do in construction. If you do just a reasonable amount of energy efficiency installations and recycling your waste materials, you can get points to silver without too much difficulty. So I'd like to change that to say that we aspire to LEED gold rather than say we set a minimum of LEED silver.
Staff, I'm going to...
I think it's fine to say that that's what we aspire to. Apparently, there's a resolution that's been adopted that says city standards, basically parrots this policy language that we will strive for a minimum of LEED silver. So we'll check on that, see what exactly that was adopted by council.
I get where you're going, Michael, but minimum is asking people to meet a certain requirement, but aspiration two doesn't give them a minimum requirement, right?
Right, but these are policies we're setting. We're not setting standards. We're setting policies, and policies, I think, aim towards the goal where you want to be. There are communities that are going to platinum and also living buildings. There's going to be a living building potentially here in Bellingham, and there are several in Seattle. I just think now is not the time to be talking about the floor, but be talking about where we'd like to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is my level of expertise, so I would say that LEED is not super easy to achieve. There are lots of complications. I've done a fair amount of LEED training. So I would say asking people to make a minimum seems...
Well, this is a standard on ourselves. These are municipal projects. This isn't for the community. That's dealt with separately. This has to do with new or renovated municipal buildings over 5,000 square feet, big buildings.
How would that affect if it went from minimum to aspiring to? How does the staff think they could accommodate that?
I'd like to find your resolution and just make sure, because if we're changing policy, we just want to know which way to proceed. Clearly setting a, and LEED has evolved. I'm sure you'll agree the standard has changed over time. So let's take a look at the provenance of that action and come back to you with it, and then informed we can decide how best to proceed.
Councilmember Lillquist, is that adequate for you?
That's fine.
Okay. Councilmember Barker.
The library facilities chapter, I think there's a lot of things, in my opinion, that are coming down in partnerships with the library, and I think some could be involved with reducing recidivism, childhood well-being. I think there's going to be a lot of partnerships that are probably going to be coming up, and I hope that will come up to ensure that we will get our important city center library. In policy CF55, and I apologize for wordsmithing, but I think that it's really important to address it. All I would ask is that we add community well-being in this. So basically we're just saying that the library is a wonderful part to downtown. I could read it. Continue to provide library service, including administration, transportation, and major circulation functions and primary library services from a downtown facility. The Central Library is a positive asset for downtown, and then my little bit of change would be contributing to economic development and community well-being, and thus should remain in the city center. And I do think that that is important language as we move forward, personally. So that would be my motion, adding the language community well-being.
Second.
Staff, do you have any comments on that motion before I open it up for discussion? Okay. All right. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Okay. Do we have any other questions? And we are going to wrap it up because quite a few of us had obligations at 3 p.m. today. If there's anything, it's a burning question that you need right now, I encourage you to ask it. If not, if staff has any additional comments or anything they would like to add to this discussion. Are we good to go?
Thank you, guys. That
Okay,
was
well,
a lot.
then, we thank you very much for your presentation and discussion. We appreciate the collaboration, and we will consider this meeting adjourned, and our next meeting is July 11th, where we will be retaking the housing portion of the comprehensive plan up. Again, we are adjourned.